Every time I think of this scripture, I think of a movie, which is probably not the right way to think about scripture, right? But every time I watch that particular movie, it's called A Walk to Remember, the young woman reads this, says, "This was my mom's favorite scripture," because of course it is. It's uplifting and it's nice, but it's also giving us a gentle reminder to make love the base of all we do. But then I'm also reminded that sometimes when we read the scripture, we should remind ourselves that we should be love, we should be kind, and we should be patient, and all of the different things. So as I work through my message today, bear that in mind, and we'll circle back to it towards the end. Just put the word I in place of love. So I am patient, I am kind, etc. Some background on this scripture. It is from the book of 1 Corinthians. And this is a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth while he was on mission in Ephesus. He wrote this letter because he had been informed that there were claims of spiritual superiority. The people there were suing one another in public courts, and they were abusing communal meals and many other immoral and unethical things. He noticed that there was a massive division of the church there, and so he wrote this letter to remind them of their unity rather than their differences. One thing he doesn't do is say, "Hey, you have all these differences, let's dissolve those and all just get along," because Paul recognizes that humans will always have something to fight about, and there's no changing that. God knows that, Paul knows that. Hopefully you know that too. But what he does do is he asks the church in Corinth to focus on the things that unify them and bring them together, and that is their faith in Jesus Christ. He writes to them and demands a higher moral and ethical standard for them to uphold in themselves and in one another. Jumping back to chapter 12, they talk a lot about spiritual gifts. And Corinth was under the impression that certain gifts were more impressive or more important than others. Specifically, they think that speaking in tongues and the gifts of prophecy are the end-all, be-all, most important things to have. And the very first thing that Paul says to the church in the first line of chapter 12 is, "Now about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be informed." First of all, I love Paul's management style here. He doesn't say, "You're doing this wrong." He says, "Hey guys, there's some misinformation. Let me help you." So what he does is he tells them that they are too focused on the what and the how of what they're doing rather than the why behind it. Has anybody here ever seen Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone? Or read the books? You are all my new friends. Welcome to the club. It's a very small club, if you can imagine. One of the lines in there, Ron Weasley, who, for those of you who don't know, is Harry Potter's best friend. He's the red-headed, quirky kid who's just in every scene. He's the one who messes up a lot. And Hermione Granger, she's the female friend. She's really smart, and she sometimes says things out of order a little bit. But at one point, she says, "I'm going to bed before one of you comes up with another brilliant plan to get us killed, or worse, expelled." And it's very funny because how is expulsion worse than death? But Ron turns to Harry and says, "Boy, she's got to get her priorities sorted." Paul is Ron in this situation. He is writing to the church in Corinth and saying, "You guys have got a lot of good going on, but you need to resort yourselves." So he writes this letter to address and correct these thoughts that they've had to this point. Has anyone here ever done something they thought was the right thing, but turned out that they were in the wrong? So you had really good motives, you thought, but then in the end, the execution wasn't so great. I'm guilty of this all the time, and sometimes I don't notice, and sometimes I do. A couple years ago, I was on a mission trip with my church down in Florida, and we were working in this school warehouse where we were packaging up school supplies and getting things put together for the local schools in the area. And one of the kids who was also on the trip with me was hanging out, talking to the local volunteers and just chatting them up, and I was so mad. I remember I yelled at him because I was not having a great day, but I yelled at him and was like, "We're here to do work, by golly, we have to do work." At the end of the day, as we were all going through what had happened through our days, they were like, okay, so who did really well today and what can we improve on? And I said, I yelled at someone for talking to people, and what's the most important thing on mission is love, right? I was more focused on getting the work done than I was on connecting with and sharing the love of God with the people that we were working for. And that's pretty much how I picture the church at Corinth. They're saying, you know what, but God's given me this gift of prophesy, and he's letting me speak in tongues, and these are really great things, and that should be enough, and that secures me a place in heaven, right? But Paul is saying, while those are good things, they are not the only things. He discusses with them in chapter 12 the importance of all the gifts, no matter how big or how little. He talks about wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, miraculous powers, prophecy, speaking in tongues, and interpreting tongues too. He makes sure to note that all are equally important. And he says in chapter 12, verse 7, "Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good." And his point here is that we all have our own separate gifts. Just because you have one over another does not make you better or worse than someone has something different. He goes on in chapter 13 to express why this is so important. So I'll read the first part of that scripture again. "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." He says to them here, it is all fine and well if you have those gifts, but if your motives and your reasons for using them and having them are off skew, it does not matter. The very first line there is, "If I speak in tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal." I've also heard that say, if I speak in tongues and all those things, I am nothing but the sound of a rusty gate. That's an awful sound. Can anyone else hear nails on a chalkboard in their head when they hear that? His point here is, you can do all of these wonderful and great things. You can work in that warehouse, but if you don't love who you're with, then you might as well not be there at all. You're getting the same thing done, which is nothing, in case I didn't make that quite clear. And Paul also, he points out those first two, prophecy and speaking in tongues, in the very first verse here to make his point and to tell everyone to get down off their high horses, because they're over here saying, well, I'm better than you because I can do this. And Paul's like, sit your butt down, child. I would have loved to have met Paul. I think that's how he would talk, even though it was, Jesus' time. One of my favorite things to think is that lovelessly doing the work of God is not doing the work of God at all. It's simply doing work. And what Paul does next is he gives clarifying details on what love is. Because some of us might say, okay, cool, you want me to do these things, you want me to do them with love, but what is love? Baby, don't hurt me no more. That was a joke. You can all laugh. It's okay. He goes through the next section very clearly defining what love is and what love is not. Love is patient. For those of you who don't know, patience is more than simply just waiting. It is waiting without grumbling. Anyone here who is a parent who asks their child to sit patiently while the mac and cheese is cooking, it'll just be a few more minutes, and the child whines and cries the whole time, the kid would say, I'm being so patient right now, and the parents would be like, no, you're not. I hear laughter. You all know it's true. I was probably the one crying for macaroni and cheese, to be fair. Patience is actively waiting. It's knowing that you're in that waiting and being okay in that space of nothingness, which is something I personally am not very good at. Bruce Lee, is anyone here familiar with that name? Bruce Lee says, patience is not passive. On the contrary, it is a concentrated strength. I believe that to be completely true, and I also believe myself to be completely weak in this area, and I hope the rest of you are better at that than I. He continues by saying that love is kind. Kindness is extended to everyone even when they don't deserve it. And we know lots of those people. We know bad drivers, we know bad customers, mean people at stores, those people who are being awful, and we all know them, probably ran into some just yesterday. Kindness through love is to all people, not just to those who we think deserve it. I work in a hotel. Has anyone ever stayed in a hotel before? Probably. Has anyone ever stood in line behind someone who's particularly atrocious? I spend a lot of my time getting yelled at for things that are completely out of my control. Someone once complained that it was cold in December, as if I could change that for them. And the hardest thing to do whenever you're standing there completely with no control, when someone is just being so mean to you over something that you have no control over, is to stand there with a smile on your face to apologize, though it's not your thing to apologize for, and then to continue to be nice to them, even after that moment has passed. But Paul is telling us, and God is telling us, that love is kind. Is anybody else here sometimes not kind? Yeah, welcome to the club. Love does not envy. In this particular context, he is saying specifically regarding the gifts of prophecy and speaking in tongues. But love and envy cannot share a space. You can have one or the other, but together they are not compatible. They're oil and water. One of the 10 Commandments even is, "Thou shalt not covet." Love does not envy. Love also does not boast. It's not a braggart. It is not claiming a spiritual hierarchy. It's not saying, hey, I have the gift of prophecy, so I'm cooler than you, I'm better than you because God made me that way. That's not very loving. It doesn't say, hey, look what I can do, and look what you can't do. Love is constantly trying to bring everybody else up to be at the same level as you so that we are all in this constant space of really great goodness. I think the world is pretty much there now, wouldn't you say? Another joke, it's fine. Love is not proud. It's not headstrong, and it is willing to admit when it is wrong. It's not self-important and doesn't put itself on a pedestal or above anyone else. In the popular musical Wicked, there's a song called Popular, and the very first line that Glinda the Good Witch says to Elphaba, who you would know as the Green Witch, she says, "Elfie, I'm going to make you my new project." And Elphaba looks at her and says, "Oh, you really don't have to do that." Glinda's response is, "I know, that's what makes me so nice." We all know someone here who does that, right? Someone who says, "Oh my gosh, I bought this for someone and they're gonna love it. Doesn't that make me a fantastic friend?" Or, "Hey, I took the garbage out today. Doesn't that mean I'm a really spectacular spouse?" Personally, I find that a very irritating thing that people do, and I'm sure that you do too. And love does not do that. Paul is saying that love does not do that. Love also does not dishonor others. It doesn't point out their flaws. One of the best tricks I learned about this was, if a person cannot fix the thing in 30 seconds or less, do not mention it. If they have spinach in their teeth, if the zipper on their pants is down, if one of their buttons has come undone, mention it. They can fix it really quick. If they have a limp, or if they have a stutter, or if you don't like their haircut, those things cannot be fixed in 30 seconds. Keep it to yourself, because that person doesn't care, and they probably already know. Love is really big on not pointing out people's shortcomings. As I had just said a few moments ago, love is really big on bringing everybody up. I learned from a manager once that the best way to handle misgivings or shortcomings is to correct a person in private and to praise them in public. So when you send out an email, you don't say, "Hey, Todd, you messed up the order again." You don't say that. You email Todd privately and say, "Hey, it looks like there was another mistake. Let's get that fixed next time." And then to the company, you say, "Great job, Todd. Everybody said you're doing a great job with this other thing. Love is really good about making people feel good about themselves, but also reminding them that there is constantly room to grow. Love is not self-seeking. It is not saying, look at all these things I've done for you. What are you doing for me? Love is not one of those things that looks for a return on investment. If anyone here works in business, you know how important a return on investment is. You want to get your money's worth, right? Love is over here selflessly giving and giving and giving with no hope or expectation of getting anything at all in return. Selfishness under the guise of selflessness. Love is not selfish, but calling it selfless. Love is not easily angered. One thing love always does is seeks for constant understanding rather than looking for blame. This person said something mean to me. Did they say something mean to me because they wanted to be mean, or did they say that because they're having a really rough day and they're having a really hard time putting their thoughts together? Love has a really long fuse. You can badger and badger at love all you want, nag all day long, and at the end of the day, love will say, hey, I've got your back. When things happen, because they will, love says, share your calm, don't join the chaos. Working in an industry where things happen in an emergent way all the time, this is the biggest skill that I have learned so far. Don't join the chaos of the situation, but add to the calm. If I'm calm, you'll be calm, and then everybody else will be too, and then no one needs to panic. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Is anybody else really good at forgiveness? I'm terrible at it. I know it's really hard. But love is forgiving constantly and always for everything, no matter what. Love does not live in the past or bring up old wounds. I've been in fights before with people who have said, yeah, I did this right now, but do you remember 6 years ago whenever you said X, Y, and Z to me? Like, that was 6 years ago, buddy, come on. I'm sure if any of you are currently married or if you have been married, this is something that my coworkers tell me often, is that their spouse will bring up issues from the past that have been solved and we've moved on from, but they'll bring them up as another weapon to be used against their partner. But love is not doing that. Brian Stevenson, who is a lawyer, says, each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I tell this quote to as many people as I can, as frequently as I can, because I want everyone to be reminded, just like love wants everyone to be reminded, that stuff happens. We have bad days, we treat people poorly, we make bad decisions, but at the end of the day, who you are is always going to be more than that one moment. You are not defined by a moment, you are defined by love. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. Charles Dickens, in Great Expectations, I'll be honest, a book I have never read, the sentence comes up, in a word, I was too cowardly to do what I knew to be right, as I was too cowardly to avoid doing what I knew to be wrong. Love does not rejoice in evil, but rejoices in truth. Love does what is right and does not do what is wrong. And we all know about temptation and how that works. We all know the story of Jesus in the desert and how hard that was for him. And if Jesus can be tempted, so can you, church. But honest love requires bravery that supersedes all temptation in every situation. And I know that we're humans and we mess up and sometimes we give in to temptation. Has anyone else ever opened a box of Oreos to just have 2 Oreos? Love is always encouraging. It's always pointing out the really good things. It's rejoicing in the truth. It's constantly reminding you of those things that need to be at the forefront of your mind. And lastly, he says, all grouped together, Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And he says the word always in front of each of these words because love is not a pick and choose its moment type of thing. Love is and was and always will be. It is bigger and broader and bolder than you and me. At the end of the day, it always protects. It always protects those that it loves. It always trusts. It always hopes, believes in the best in people. And it always perseveres. This is my favorite one. Because we need a persistent kind of love. Because if you're anything like me, and I'm sure that you are, you mess up all the time. And you need that love behind you, backing you, holding you and supporting you, helping you to float. Because otherwise I would sink. In addition to I can't swim, so that's a problem. Thank you for laughing, and I didn't have to tell you that was a joke. Except that it's true, I really can't swim. One of my favorite things about Paul is that he persecuted Christians. If you read the Bible and you learn about Paul, that's what we know about him whenever he first comes onto the scene, is that he's just this really mean guy who's walking around persecuting and killing people, which is not great. But what I love so much about Paul is that God's love was big enough and strong enough to cover even him. At the end of the day, Paul was the biggest planter of churches. He was out there telling everyone the good news, and he was trying so hard and so honestly and so earnestly to get everyone to follow Christ because he saw the light. Quite literally, he saw the light. And God's love was so big that he covered even this terrible, terrible person and made him so much better. A modern day story is kind of like the Grinch, right? He's bad, and then he's not bad anymore, and then his heart grows 3 times, and somehow he doesn't have a heart attack. It's a modern miracle, if you ask me. The word agape means unconditional or selfless love. Love does not depend on the recipient, but entirely on the act of the giver. So the recipient, like Paul, could say, I don't want that. I don't want to be part of this. I don't want you to come near me. No. And unconditional agape love says, you know what, Paul? Even in your pushing me away, I am still going to hold you close. And that's what I love so much about grace, too. It does the same thing. Agape, though, requires an active commitment. It means working daily and constantly choosing to lead with love and to make love the base of everything that you do. I'm not married, nor have I ever been, but another piece of really great marital advice that I keep being given by people who think that I need it, don't know why, but they keep saying that love does not just happen. It's something that you have to wake up every day and decide this. I want to do this again. Being a parent is that same way. Sometimes it might feel completely natural to look at your child and say, oh, I just love you so much and you're so cute. And other times you're like, I want to push you over a hill. I won't tell you who told me that. But even in those moments of pure frustration and anger and exhaustion, love is saying, okay, I want to push you over a hill, but I would come pick you up at the end. It's that choice to always be the bigger person and the bigger thing. And God is love, right? We've all heard that said. You've been coming to church for at least one day. God is love. And if love is patient, and if love is kind, and if love is all those things, then God is patient, God is kind, and God is all those things too. Now, I had asked you in the beginning to keep in the back of your mind if you could replace the word I for love in this scripture. Because if our goal and our aim is to live a Christ-like life, then we should aim daily to be able to replace that. Let me read it for you. I am patient, I am kind. I do not envy, I do not boast, I am not proud. I do not dishonor others, I am not self-seeking, I am not easily angered, I keep no record of wrongs. I do not delight in evil, but rejoice with the truth. I always protect, always trust, always hope, and always persevere. First of all, that sounds so nice. It's like a poem. Thank you, Paul. But can you honestly say, when you read that line and when I read that, did you feel as though you fit into all of those categories? I'm sure that some of them you say, yep, I fit into that one really well. And I'm sure there were others that you said, I'm a little bit proud. Have you seen my hair today? My goal every day is to strive and to aim and to try to make sure that my name will always fit in there. And not only that I think I fit into those categories, but that those who spend time with me and around me can also say, hey, you know what? Laura is patient, and she is kind, and she does not envy or boast or all the things. I hope that you can say that about yourself. I know I can say many of those things about many of you. But take a look at the people you keep in your life too. Can you say those things about them as well? Hopefully you can. And if you can't, be the love that they need to move towards being that person. There's always room to grow. I know that. I stand at 5'4" since 8th grade. I'm not going to do any more growing, and that makes me sad. But as far as the important stuff goes, because I'm not a very funny comedian, don't worry, this is free. At the end of the day, there's always room to grow. There's always room to be better. And when you think you've perfected one thing, something else will come up, just a little bit short. And I'm sure someone will point it out for you. Don't worry, give it some time. But then work and strive to be the love that God has placed in you, to be the love that this world needs, because we are the hands and feet of Christ. Paul ends that passage by saying, and now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. So go forth daily, lead with love, and hopefully, as you move on with your life, you won't have to hear the word love so many times in such quite succession, because that was quite a lot, and I understand that.